Good morning, everybody. Today we are going to start talking about circles. So we've got a couple things we're going to do. We're going to talk about circumference of a circle today, and we're going to talk about the area of a circle tomorrow. So please make sure you have your topic and essential question down. Again, we're just going to talk about circumference today. You can leave off and area. We'll deal with that tomorrow. The circumference of circles today. And the essential question is, where did pi come from? And the bakery. Where did the Greek letter pi that we use when we're talking about circles, where did that come from? Well, pi is a Greek letter. It's a letter in their alphabet, just like we have X and Y and Z. And this came from the Greeks exploring and doing some measurements on circles. Okay, so way back in the day, the Greeks would look at things that were circular and they do some measurements to try to understand them better. And one thing that they noticed is that when they had a circle and they measured all the way around that circle, and then they measured the diameter of that circle and divided those two things. So the circumference divided by the diameter, they always got this number, 3.14, and it kept going. Now, how closely you could calculate that has gotten better through the years. They couldn't probably get to this many digits back in the day just because they didn't have very sophisticated measuring devices. But they'd always notice they'd get this number that's just like a little bit more than 3. So every time they drew a circle, no matter how big it was, the circumference was just over 3 times bigger than the diameter. And so this struck them as a pretty important number. So they just started calling it pi. They used one of the letters of their alphabets to represent this number. And we still do that today. Okay. So because the circumference is pi times the diameter, we use this formula if we want to calculate the circumference. So this is equivalent to this. Okay, so circumference divided by diameter equals pi is the same thing as saying pi times diameter is the circumference. The circumference equals pi times the diameter. And sometimes you'll see it written like this, and this is saying the same thing too. Instead of saying pi times the diameter, it might say 2 times pi times the radius. Okay, well, to show you that those are the same, remember we can multiply numbers in any order we want, right? So I could rearrange this, since it's all multiplication, to be 2 times the radius times pi. And hopefully recognize 2 times the radius is just the diameter. It's going to get the diameter times pi, just like we have over here. Okay, so radius, remember, from the center of the circle to the edge. Diameter is all the way across, so diameter is twice as big as the radius. So this is useful to use sometimes if we're given the radius. This is maybe useful to use if we're given the circumference. We can use either one. I like this one because it connects to the formula we're going to look at tomorrow for area. They're very similar. So you can decide which one you like to use. But what the circumference is the distance around a circle. It's kind of a fancy way of saying the perimeter of the circle. Okay, how far is it around the circle? If you were to take a tape measure, put it here, go around the circle until you get back to where you started, what would that measurement be? That's what a circumference is. So let's do a couple. So if I'm trying to find the circumference of this circle, I'm trying to decide which to use, pi times diameter or pi times double the radius. Okay, because I'm given the diameter here, I'll probably just go ahead and default it to using this one. Okay. If I was given the radius, I'd want to double it first and then multiply by pi. But because it gives me the diameter, I can just multiply that diameter times pi. Now, when we're doing this, some of you may have a pi button on your calculator. If not, that's okay. We're going to use, instead of using that pi button just to keep our numbers consistent and keep us practicing what pi is about equal to, we're going to use 3.14. 3.14 is very close to pi. It's a good estimate of pi. So in all these examples, if you have a pi button on your calculator, don't use it. Just type in 3.14. Okay. Otherwise, your answers will be slightly different than what we're coming up with. Okay. So if I take my calculator and do 14 times 3.14, I get 43.96. Okay. Also, using uh, 3.14 for pi, we're never going to get more than a handful of decimals. So we'll never need to round. Okay, it's already rounded by the fact that we're using this number instead of like all of pi. Okay, so 43.96, and that is in inches. The diameter is in inches, the circumference is in inches, because again, it's just the distance around. Okay, let's try another one. So for this one, I'm given the radius, so maybe this is what I'm doing here. So whenever you're given the radius, first thing you want to do is you want to double it to find the diameter. So if the radius is 3, diameter is 6, then you're going to multiply 6 times pi. Again, I'm going to use 3.14. Okay, so if you plug it in here, it would be 2 times 3.14 times 3, and the 2 times 3 gives you the 6, so it's the same thing. So if I plug into my calculator 6 times 3.14, I get 18.84. Okay, so that's 18.84, and it's measured in centimeters. Okay. All right. So what about this one? Miss Waldbillig walked around a circular island with a radius of 5 miles. What is the circumference of the island? So we're given this number 5. So take a minute to think. Are we just going to multiply this by pi, or are we going to double it first? Okay. What do you think? Okay. Hopefully you got that. Yes, we are going to double this, right? This is the radius. Is 5 miles. Radius is from the center to the edge. Okay, if I'm doing the circumference, it's pi times the diameter, which is all the way across. So I would double 5 to get a diameter of 10. And I'm going to multiply 10 by 3.14. Now, yes, we're able to use calculators on this unit, but if you're reaching for your calculator right now, stop. We shouldn't need a calculator to multiply something by 10. Remember, all multiplying by 10 does is move the decimal one place to the right. So 3.14 times 10 is just 31.4. And that would be in miles, because this is in miles. So 31.4 miles. Okay. All right. So why don't you try these 3? I'm going to pause it here, see what you can do, and then we'll resume and see how you did. All right, welcome back. Hopefully these are the answers you got. I didn't have much room, so I didn't write the units, but it should be the same as this. So here we're given the diameter, so we can just go ahead and multiply this 40 by 3.14. Gives me 125.6 inches. Okay, this one we're given the radius, so we have to double it first. So if the radius is 21, diameter is 42. 42 times 3.14 is 131.88. Okay, last one, we are given the diameter, 56. So 56 times 3.14 is 175.84. Okay. All right, so let's look at a couple other types of questions we could answer given this information. So this one, instead of giving us the radius or diameter and having us find the circumference, this one tells me the circumference is 50.24 and I want to know the radius. Okay, so remember, I'm multiplying the diameter times 3.14 to get the circumference. It tells me in this case that the circumference is 50.24. So if we think back to our equation solving stuff, okay, whatever the diameter is times 3.14 equals 50.24. So this is an equation I could solve for the diameter. Okay. So to get d by itself, I would divide by 3.14. Okay, so I had multiplied by 3.14 to get the circumference. So I'm undoing that step. So if I divide 50.24 by 3.14, I get 16. So the diameter is 16. Remember, diameter is all the way across. Does that answer my question? And no, that's not asking for the diameter, it's asking for the radius. But if I know the diameter, remember the radius is just half of that. So if the diameter is 16, that means the radius is 8. Okay? And this has been measured in centimeters. So 8 centimeters is my radius. Okay, so you can use that equation solving stuff to work backwards to solve some of those questions. So let's try a couple more of those. So a circular ground has a circumference of 30 times pi feet. So this is an example of one where they're not using 3.14, they're giving the exact answer. Okay? Because pi is a decimal that goes on forever, the only way to write it exactly is to actually use the symbol pi to represent that whole number. So here it says the circumference is 30 times pi. Okay, well, if we remember, diameter times pi is what gives me the circumference. And in this case, the circumference is 30 times pi. Okay, well, that should be a pretty obvious example. Something times pi equals 30 times pi. Well, that means the d has to be 30. All right, so 30 feet would be the diameter. If we were doing train tracks for this, what we would do is to get d by itself is we divide by pi. And you have 30 times pi divided by pi. So pi would actually cancel out on both sides. And you get d equals 30. Okay. All right, so this one says the circumference is 26 pi. Find the diameter. So again, we can work backwards. If the circumference is 26 times pi, that means the diameter is just 26. Right? Because we'd multiply the diameter times pi in order to get the circumference. So diameter is 26 in this case. Okay. The tip of the minute hand travels 8 centimeters in 1 hour, 8 pi centimeters in 1 hour. Okay. So let's talk about a clock. Got a clock. The minute hand, remember, is attached in the middle, goes out to the edge. So it tells me it travels 8 pi centimeters. So the distance it travels in 1 hour would be once around the circle. Remember, the distance that is around the circle is the circumference. So this 8 pi is the circumference. It wants me to find the length of the minute hand. So the length of the minute hand here, if the minute hand goes from the center to the edge, is the radius. Okay? So it gives me the circumference is 8 pi, and it asks me the radius. Okay, so I can work backwards for this one. So if the circumference is 8 pi, that tells me that the diameter all the way across is 8. Right? Because 8 times circumference times diameter times pi gives me the circumference. And with the diameter is 8, now I can figure out the radius, because the radius is half of the diameter. Half of 8 is 4. So 4 centimeters would be the length of the minute hand in that case. All right. So I'm going to leave you with these three to try on your own again that are circumference related questions, but they ask you a couple of different things. So read them carefully, see what you can do. We'll check back in a minute and see how you did. All right. So let's check out these. Hopefully you got D, A, and D for your answers. So let's check them out. So the first one, what is the circumference of a circle with radius 13.5? So this one's pretty straightforward. We're given the radius. We want to find the circumference. Remember, if given the radius, we first double it to find the diameter. 13.5 times 2 is 27. And then we would multiply that by pi. Now, if you notice, all these answers are given as exact answers, so they have pi in them. Okay, so I wouldn't multiply by 3.14. It's not having me use the estimate here. It's giving me the exact answer. Okay, so the exact answer is 27 times pi, or 27 pi, right here. All right, number two. During practice, an athlete ran one lap around a circular gym. So he's going around the gym, so he's running the circumference. It is 75 feet wide. So if the gym is that wide, that's the diameter. Okay, about how far did the athlete run? So notice it says about, and my answers are not exact. They don't have pi in them, they're decimals. That tells me we did use 3.14 here. Okay. So I want to know how far he ran. That's the circumference. So I take the diameter of 75, multiply by 3.14, and that'll tell me the diameter. When I do that, I get 230, or the circumference. When I do that, I get 235.5. So we ran about 235.5 feet. All right, last one. It gives me the circumference. It says the circumference is 11 pi. So again, it's giving me the exact circumference, 11 pi. And I'm supposed to find the radius. All right, so if I work backwards, if the circumference is 11 pi, that means the diameter is just 11. Okay. Well, if the diameter is 11, cut that in half, and you get 5.5 for the radius. Okay. All right, I'm going to let you give some of these a shot. Make sure to ask questions if you have them. Good luck.